So what your body has, what we all have, is this wonderful mental mechanism that we call dissociation. And dissociation is essentially the capacity to disengage from the external world and increasingly attend to your inner world. And so you go from being externally focused to being internally focused. And you disengage from all of the pain and the threat that's outside, and you try to go to this protective inner place. And it uses different parts of the brain than the fight or flight response, and it involves a different set of stages as you become increasingly disengaged. So the first stage of dissociation is to avoid whatever the potential threat is. If you can't avoid it, you are compliant. Compliance is a component of dissociation. And if your compliance is inadequate and you continue to be under threat, you literally have a full-blown dissociation where your body releases your own endogenous opiates, you retreat to this inner place, and you can have a dissociation that's so severe that you literally faint or become unconscious. And this is a very common form of adaptation that very young children use, or children who are in inescapable, unavoidable situations, such as being a toddler in a domestic violence environment, or being a young victim of sexual abuse. Dissociation is frequently the adaptation of choice. Now, to make this a little bit more challenging, of course, is that I've talked about the fight or flight response, and it uses certain systems in the brain, and talked about dissociation, uses different other systems in the brain. The reality is these adaptations can take place at the same time. And some kids use both of these. And what they'll do is, under certain circumstances, they'll explode and have a fight or flight response, and under other circumstances, they'll shut down and have a dissociative avoidant response. And this is very characteristic of what we call complex trauma. Because these individuals during their life have had different forms of, if you will, adversity or abuse or chaos or threat, they've used different combinations of the fight or flight response and the dissociative response, and as a result, they have a very complex set of emotional, social, and behavioral problems. And again, this is one of the reasons that these kids are so challenging to parent. This is one of the reasons these kids confuse the mental health system. It's one of the reasons that in one moment they can be delightful and very creative, and in the next moment they can act like a primitive, like out of control person. And it really is one of the major challenges of our field, is trying to help tease out how these different coping mechanisms are impacted by developmental trauma and adversity, and then how you actually address that and help those systems become more appropriately regulated. And we know we can do it, but it's harder, it's a challenge, it's not easy. Dissociation is not a pathological thing. Everybody uses dissociation every day. When you're in a boring lecture, you dissociate, you partially disengage, you go to your inner world and you think about stuff. With people that are very creative, when you sort of get lost in a book or lost in a creative activity like drawing or sculpting, that involves dissociation. And you'll notice that a lot of the regulatory choices that your child uses have a dissociative quality. So for example, if your child likes to go play video games and they get all upset and stirred up and they want to go into their room and play video games, they're trying to self-regulate by using a dissociative mechanism. Video games, you can get lost in them. It's a dissociative activity, and it can actually be something that these kids have discovered is a way to regulate. Same thing with reading. Reading is dissociative. Going to the movies is dissociative. And so everything not everything that is dissociative is pathological. It's just the degree to which you choose to disengage from the world. If you sat around and read books all day long and didn't want to socialize, didn't want to do sport, didn't want to have conversation at dinner, that would be pathological. But if you choose to have an hour and a half reading before you go to bed to regulate yourself so that you can make that transition to sleep, because sleep has been such a hard thing for you, that's adaptive.